Tēnā rā tātou, ka nūti mihi aroha ki o koutou e nā maunga whakahi kua hara mai nei ki a whakawhiti nā whakaaro rangatira e pāna te kaupapa o whānau ora. Ki o kōrua, te MC Joe, ka nūti mihi aroha ki o kōrua hoki, ki te poari me te pauarihi me nā kano i a tāhua, te pūtahitanga o te waipainamu, ka nūti mihi miharo ki o koutou. Ki nā kaiwhakarite o tēnei hoihoinga, e hoama ka mihi rawa tu hoki. Ko wai au, he uri o tahu pōtiki, ko waitake te awa, ko ka te huerapa me ka te hatea ka hapu. Tēnā rā o koutou. Thanks, Ra, for saying I have a face for everything, but potentially not the morning. It is just a delight to be here. So when Pūtahitanga was just a fraction old, we were here with so many radiant faces that are back here today. When we started the hot house that brought our whānau together to start jamming on whānau ora, we started here. So it's just a heartwarming experience to be back here. And what I want to talk about today is revolution, because we're all part of a revolution. So first off, congratulations for changing the world, because that's what you're all doing. And when I was 5, you have to picture the face covered in freckles, and they were really prominent. And I had an afro because my mother kept brushing my hair when it was dry. And I was short. So I was short, freckly with an afro. And I had a life highlight, which was I got to poke my tongue out at the then Prime Minister Muldoon. And it was at the Springbok protests. So I grew up protesting, thinking that these guys were the heroes. I grew up thinking that the whole purpose of life was to change life, to make meaning, and I was really aware every day that I was born into a world in which movements and revolutions had occurred. I was born into a world where women had moved from being artefacts and property to having freedom of personal security and having equal rights to pay, and at a time when we had seen Martin Luther King through to Che Guevara quite literally change the world. So I didn't really have much question about what I was going to do with my life. These were my heroes that I read about. At age 12, I got given Animal Farm. I was revolutionised from a young age. I had no choice. And I was really just into, well, sign me up. So what do? And at home, it was so easy to answer that question. Because just in the same way, the world had been transformed by revolutionaries who had come along and seen a way for the world to be different, who had seen a way for those that were marginalised to be embraced, and more importantly, for those who are marginalised to take over and make the world in their own image, could look at exactly the same thing here. And I heard the stories, about our people going into the United Nations after having been turned away generations before, and making the United Nations hear our karanga. I heard the stories about the United Nations spending 3 hours in karakia from Indigenous peoples around the world, despite the United Nations saying, no thanks, we'll have no karakia. Their reward was they got 3 hours. And I'd heard the stories about our protest movements, about going to the courts, about going from a time when we had to fight just to be seen, to having these decisions that said, Te Tiriti is the founding document of our nation. And so naturally I went to law school, because I thought this is how to continue contributing to this. This is how to be part of a revolution. This is how to be part of a movement. Go to law school. And I survived law school, not quite with my soul intact, but at least came out on the other side and had the most exceptional timing to come out of law school and the Foreshore seabed to happen. So one of the first things that I did that mattered when I came out of law school was to write an intervention for the United Nations about the Foreshore seabed and how it discriminated against our people. And in writing that intervention, the theme of the UN bit that we were at the time was mana wahine. So I wrote an intervention that started with honouring Whaia Tariana Turia. And to be back here, oh dear, hapu, emotional. To be part of her next part of her legacy is just overwhelming. So many things are overwhelming at the moment. And so we wrote this intervention that acknowledged Whaia Tari for having the courage to cross the floor. And in doing that, we're acknowledging the courage of all of these people that have come before, who have fought for something that drove them from the core of their being. So I was young and idealistic and doing these things that spoke to my heart, and then we won. We won at the United Nations. Everywhere we went, the United Nations said, yes, this is a righteous cause, and you are right. This thing is very wrong. And out the back of that, nothing changed. And that broke my heart. And I started to wonder, well, did I actually have really rubbish timing? Was I born a generation too late? Was this whole thing about being an advocate and going to the United Nations, was I just too late? And eventually I found an answer to that, which was in Te Pūtahitango Te Waipounamu. And it wasn't that I was a generation too late, it's just that each generation has a different job. So the next thing that spoke to my heart, like acknowledging Whaia Tariana Turia before the United Nations, was being part of our community and being able to stand with our community and say, your tipuna believe in you, so do we. Because that's what we're all here because of. Because we've got an ancestral mandate, because we've got an ancestral responsibility, and we've got people who believe in us to do something with that responsibility. And so I started thinking about how different it felt to fight, to how it felt to go to our community and say, really honestly, I believe in you and I believe in what we can do together. And I realized there was this difference between a political movement and a social movement. So a political movement is all about getting our dear politicians, hope everyone votes shortly, to do something that we want. It's the political movement that says these are the grand standards, the rights and the norms that we think our politicians should uphold. And that's what all of those heroes in the slides before did. They fought to win the moral high ground, and we needed them to do that. For the next generation, though, it's not about fighting for those rights. They've already been recognised. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is here, it's landed. We've inherited that. The recognition of the treaty is here. We don't need to convince the politicians. We might need some help keeping them honest, but we don't necessarily need to convince them of the righteousness of that. What we need to do this generation is to move our communities. It's the social movement, it's the transformation from within that perhaps the politician's best gift is to get out of the way of. So if I'm not a generation too late, it's just a different movement that I was born into. I started thinking, well, so how do you make a movement work? And I think about what Tatipani and Hannah spoke about a couple of days ago, about how it can take a generation to lose something and 3 generations to rejuvenate it. I think about how it took us 7 generations to fight for the right, and how many more generations it will take us to achieve the aspirations that started those fights for justice. And I found that a little bit overwhelming because it seemed like more of a marathon than a sprint, and I'm not moving particularly fast at the moment. So I looked at this, which is, this is the standard cycle of what happens to a social movement. So the standard sort of cycle is that it starts to emerge, and then you have a group of people coalesce around it, come together, and you get enough people that are involved and heading in the same direction that it gets organised. And then after it's been organised and successful, it starts to decline. And we can see that in all kinds of social movements, whether we look at the women's rights movement, whether we look at the various efforts when it comes to African American rights, or if we look at Indigenous rights all across the world, what we see is people move and things change, then they get recognised, and then they kind of fall out of the limelight and things start to fragment. And I thought, that's just not okay. We can't have that. So I went looking for someone else who was smarter and had a better model. And this gave me hope that we can continue to maintain a movement if we do something different, which is to continue to sustain it. This is what all the theories are about, that effectively you have a whole cycle of re-enlisting people in the cause. You remobilise people in the cause. And naturally, I truth-checked it against what we do, because we are the source of all original knowledge and we did everything first. Seriously, we celebrate graffiti, but rock art was my tupuna that were doing it. And so I looked at what we have been doing, and what I see in our contemporary history is that we have waves of movements, that we are brilliant at maintaining movements because we continually bring people into the next wave. If we look at the movement towards our settlements, that was then the next wave supported by the movement for our reo. That was then supported by the next part of our movements for the reo and our culture and identity. When we look at matatini every couple of years, we can see that we continue to sustain people because we consistently bring them in. So if we bring all of that together, what does it mean for putahitanga? What does it mean for whānau? The first thing that I think it means is that there is urgency. So whānau is now at a place where it's organised, where it's supported by government, where we have the remarkable thing of commissioning agencies like putahitanga. That means that potentially we're at the precipice of being so organised we move into decline. But we wouldn't all be sitting here if we believed that that was acceptable. We don't. It's not. So what do? First, we recognise that this movement, this transformation of our communities is never safe. That it is something we've got to treat as precious, that needs energy to be fueled every day by every heart that believes in it. And then the second is we can do what we know how to do so well, which we've done for generations, and that's to maintain the cycle of enlisting people. So the first thing that you need is a calling. If we're going to enlist people, we need a calling. So how do we do a calling? So there's three options. We can talk about the injustice, and the righteous indignation about realities can move people. And I think that was really effective at the start. But I think the other two ways of doing it now are far more important. And they are, we either talk about the solutions or we talk about the motivations. And the thing I love about this symposium is that it does both. It exists to celebrate the solutions that our communities are championing, and it tells the stories of why we're here at all. It speaks to the motivations. And for all of us, it's deeply personal. So for me, I have lots of degrees and all of that kind of stuff, and I'm also a high school dropout whose mother committed suicide. So final order is not just an idea, and it's not an idea for any of us, because we've got all of those complexities and dimensions to who we are. So we need to talk about solutions, and we need to be honest about the motivations why we're here. The second is that we need to build capability, and it needs to be the capability that doesn't look like what was, because what got us here will not get us there. If we're genuinely in the business of unlocking our own truths so that we can create solutions, we need new capability to do that. And I think that capability comes in all different facets. So we need to be able to see the weird and the wild futures that are coming and what robots are going to do. Hurrah for robots. We need to be able to see different solutions that require different ways of turning problems on their head. And we need to be aspiring to change that is not humble. We should absolutely retain the essence of who we are to be humble as humans, but our aspirations should be anything but. This is urgent, this is real, this is personal, and only something that is audacious is deserving of the next generation. And then the final thing is we need to sustain the movement. So we need to champion, we need to continue fueling the energy in our communities. And I commend Pūtahitanga for continuing to fuel our communities. Yes, there is funding. Funding is good, but the real fuel comes from the belief in our people. If the belief comes first and the funding comes second, then I believe that we will win. So, in final words, if I was to say anything about this symposium, it's that the feeling in this room of love and connection, you can't let it go. So we all know that experience of coming to a conference, being so full that we're not really sure what we heard anymore. But it was amazing, and we're so glad we went. Yeah, you're feeling it. I got it. Which is great, but you can't let it go. So on Monday, you're still part of a movement. On Tuesday, you're still part of a movement, and every day thereafter. You're part of a movement that you can trace back to the time when the waka left distant shores to come here. You're part of a movement that has changed our whole global existence. When our people were doing karanga and karakia in the United Nations, we changed the international order. When our settlement taniwha bring home those things, they change our tribal order. When each of us goes home and talks to the people in our family about things that matter, we change the home. And if we can't take this community that is the nexus between all of those points. So in this room, we are connected internationally. We are connected around the motu to different iwi. We are connected to different hapori. We are connected to many homes in many places. If we cannot maintain this connection, then the movement on Monday will be lonelier for it. And this movement, which is so precious, which owes so much gratitude to so many remarkable people, needs you to keep it precious. We are at a time when it seems like we are safe, but in that safety is a real call to urgency to do everything that you possibly can. Because if it takes a village to raise a child, what does it take to change the world? All of you. Nā reira, tēnā rā koutou.
Tēnā koe, Sacha. He mihi nui, mihi aroha kia koe, me tō pipi, tēnā kōrua. Ka nui te mihi, atamari koutou. I'd just like to say I first heard about Sacha when they were... I'd just come back from some hui in the United States, doing some mahi on preparing for the draft declaration, and I'd come home in 2003, and I really wanted to get to the office, the big house in Hereford Street, and talk about this, and Tahu Pōtiki was the CEO at the time, and I'd heard that there was an amazing team in the legal services team at Te Rūnanga o Ngai Tahu, and I really wanted to share some stuff about what I'd learned at working with other Indigenous peoples internationally. And Sacha had already beat me to the front line there, and she had already been working on the submission, and so I was really happy that how can two Ngai Tahu women be at different places in the world trying to chase up all our Ngai Tahu men to get on with it. And so I really wanted her to, kia ora. I really wanted to support once I'd found out that Sacha was doing this work. And sorry about it, my other Tāne relations, but I was really angry when two of our Tāne went off to the Permanent Forum without a wahine who had actually done the work. So this is my place to say thank you, Sacha, because I was a little upset, and I made that known to those whānau of ours, and said, how can you, when the Permanent Forum was there talking about wahine, that was the theme of that forum, and present a submission that had actually been written by a woman. So kia ora, Sacha, for that and for this morning, and your contributions. And I'm just so proud to be able to say, carry on. And I know Sacha's all about action. And now that we have creating those future generations, not just supporting them, I want to mihi to you, your whānau, at home, also here in Ōtautahi, and to really just honour you amongst many other Ngāi Tahu wahine who are also my heroes. Eri Hapiti Murchie, Eri Hapiti Ramsden, Ati Aroha, heaps of towers that I have personally felt supported and mentored by. So Sacha, keep the action up, and I know there's no holding it back really, but I want to do this for you, and I'm a little bit nervous because it's a special lullaby that my sister sings.
Aww.
And I have to do it because so bear with me. I'll let you hold this. This is for your PP. My, 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 yeah. Oh my, yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 oh, yeah, oh. Oh my, yeah, oh. Oh my, oh my, oh my, yeah. Oh my, yeah, oh. Yeah, 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 oh. Yeah, oh, yeah. Oh my, oh my, oh my, oh. Yeah, 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 oh. Yeah, 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 oh. Yeah, yeah, oh. Oh my, oh my, oh my, oh. Oh my, oh my, oh. Yeah, 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 oh. Oh my, yeah, oh. Oh, me take Wilson, all my relations. That's from the Lakota people for you, and that's what I learned when I was over there in the New York State.